Hello, and welcome to the JCC of Metro Detroit's 70th Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair. My name is Nancy Finkel, and I am a member of the Book Fair Committee. It is my pleasure to welcome you on this Wednesday afternoon as we commemorate Kristallnacht by discussing Eternal by Lisa Scottoline. This is the 70th Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair, and we're celebrating with an entire year of book and story programming. Join us as we honor the world's first Jewish book fair, highlighting diverse authors, curating new Jewish writing, and promoting the global art of Jewish storytelling. Our festival week, which continues through Sunday, November 14th, is just the beginning. Be sure to come back all year for exceptional opportunities to engage with the best of Jewish books and authors. To see our full event schedule, watch events you may have missed, and find our online store where you can find Eternal and plenty of other hand-selected books and gifts, visit our website at culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. If you enjoy this event and other book fair events, please consider becoming a patron or donating to the book fair. You can do either or both at our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. We rely on community support to make this annual event possible, so thank you in advance for becoming part of the family. The Book Fair team would like to thank the following for their support. Sponsor Barbara Nussbaum, co-sponsors Temple Israel Sisterhood, Fran and David Grossman, and the Holocaust Memorial Center, Zeckelman Family Campus. Our friends at the Holocaust Memorial Center have graciously offered free admission today to anyone who brings their digital ticket from this event. It's a really enlightening way to spend the rest of your afternoon after our discussion. I want to extend our deepest gratitude to the whole Book Fair Committee. Your dedication, innovation, commitment, and hard work have made all this possible. We have a thrilling event for you this afternoon, and we want you to be a part of it. You can ask questions and offer comments in the YouTube comment section below, or by texting the number in the corner of your screen. Our speakers have a great discussion prepared, and they will take as many of your questions as they can. While you're here at our YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the reminder bell. That way you'll never miss any of our exciting events. The focus of today's event is the novel Eternal. We have with us the author of the book, Lisa Scottoline, as well as local author Karen Tintori, who will moderate the discussion. Fueled by true events unfolding over decades, Eternal is a tale of loyalty and loss, family and food, love and war, all set in one of the world's most beautiful cities, Rome, at its darkest moment, the rise of Mussolini and World War II. Against this backdrop, the intertwined fates of Elisabetta, Marco, Sandro, and their families will be decided in a heartbreaking story of both the best and the worst that the world has to offer. Lisa Scottoline is the New York Times bestselling author of 32 novels, which are in print in 35 countries. She served as the president of the Mystery Writers of America and writes a weekly column with her daughter for the Philadelphia Inquirer. She has taught at her alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Karen Tintori is a prolific author of fiction and nonfiction books, active in the Detroit Jewish community and Italian genealogy. Please join me in welcoming Lisa Scottoline and Karen Tintori.
Thank you, Nancy. That was a fabulous introduction to a fabulous, fabulous book. And I urge everyone to go out and buy it from Jewish Book Fair. This book was pressed upon me by my dear friend Susie Tarabello. She called me up one day and she said, "Oh my God, I'm reading this book. You have got to read it. You're going to love it." Nancy set it up by saying everything that it included. She said it's set in Rome. It's set during the rise of fascism. There's a young girl who wants to become a writer. There's food. And she said, "You're just going to love this book." And I did. And I was thrilled to be here with you because I've been a fangirl for a while.
Aww.
Since 2004 when I read Killer Smile, part of your Rosati D'Annunzio series.
Well, thank you. Thanks to Nancy. Thanks to everyone for being here. Thanks for having me. And Karen, this is going to be fun because I loved talking with you when we did last week. So ask me, but thank you for those very kind things you said about the book.
It is going to be fun. One of the most oft questions we get asked is, where do you get your ideas? And I know that this idea has been simmering in your brain for quite a long time. And it's so different from the Rosati D'Annunzio legal thrillers that you wrote with your trademark humor. So why eternal? Why now?
Right. That's a very legitimate question. And, the answer is probably, it was stewing in me, believe it or not, for 40 years. And it's really a specific origin. I went to college at Penn, and I was lucky enough to have as a professor, Philip Roth. Wow. There was one class where 15 kids were in it, and it was a year long. And it was once a week, he would come in and talk to us about all kinds of fiction and nonfiction. And he also included Holocaust fiction. And by the way, I actually have some visual aid because it was an amazing course. And I was on the yearbook staff as a photographer. And so during the class, I said, "May I take your picture?" And this is actually a picture of Philip Roth teaching our class in 1975. He would come in. He was so brilliant, and he would come in and just lecture, just like this, very formal. We didn't really have a lot of questions. We were all kind of in awe, but he would just lecture about the book. It was like, honestly, it was like taking physics from Einstein. And he was the one who introduced me to all of us to the work of Primo Levi. And I'm embarrassed to say that, although it was the 70s, I had known of Primo Levi, who, as you know, was an Italian Jewish chemist and who lived during Mussolini's time, but was an anti-fascist, was ultimately arrested by the Nazis, sent to Modena, the Carpi Fossili camp, which is in the book, and then to Auschwitz, and thank God survived to write the incredible memoir, If This Is a Man, or published here as Survival in Auschwitz. And I guess, to make a long story short, for 40 years, it has bothered me that, because I think in a way, all of my books are about family and justice and love in some way. And it's stuck in my brain. I don't really have a religious affiliation. I really wasn't raised with one, but I do have a fairly strong Italian identification, Italian American. And I must say that as a personal matter, I said to myself, I want to understand why people followed Mussolini, because I'm horrified. As an Italian American, I'm horrified that happened. And I didn't feel that there was a real reckoning about it in popular fiction. So here I'm writing all these different kinds of books. And as I say, there's thrillers, some are domestic thrillers. I write humor. But all this time, I'm like, I wonder if am I allowed to write this too? As historical fiction, it's completely different. Most of my novels are brief. They take place in 3 days. They involve a single family. And some issue of law and justice. Here is a much bigger canvas, right? 20 years, the Ventennio, Mussolini's reign, 3 families, 1 Jewish, 2 Gentile. How are they affected by this? And a love triangle. So it was really, for me, a leap forward. But where it came from is, if not now, when? And why not me? What am I waiting for? Because the story, what struck me is that unlike Nazism, which was so clearly anti-Semitic from the outset, fascism in Italy was not. Italian Jews were very well assimilated. The mayor of Rome was Jewish. The intermarriage rate at the time was 50%. So Italian Jews joined the fascist party in the same percentage as Gentiles. We can talk later about why people joined it, but they were attracted to it. It's kind of a big business and kind of a conservatism, and it was a patriotic party. So it made, for me, there's so many flip-flops that are kind of ironic during this time period in Italy, the biggest one being that Italy flips sides and surrenders. But I thought, I really want to examine that. And then I just said to myself, I feel like I've been practicing on the job for 30 years, 35 years, honestly, to write this novel. And I finally just said, go for it. It's a really long answer, Karen.
No. The amount of research that you did, when I got to the back of the book and read your notes on the amount of research, it was just staggering. And can you tell us a little bit about that? And how long, from the time you wrote the first sentence on your first draft, about how long did it take you to actually write the book? And tell us, please, about your research, because it's fabulous.
Oh, you're so kind. Well, I said to myself, and this is the lawyer in me, I was very aware that what happened to the Jews of Rome had not been written in popular American fiction. And I thought that was a gross lacuna, basically. That was just terrible, especially given how Rome is such a popular tourist destination, and also the fact that the Vatican is there. And so I thought this is really interesting and hard to look at. And to a certain extent, honestly, I thought it had been whitewashed. I remember I did all this research, which we'll talk about in a minute, but I remember specifically, I had a historian whom I engaged, but I also had a historian who I spoke with, because what bothered me was that that these crimes that occurred in Rome in October 1943 were never the subject of a Nuremberg-like trial. There was no globally televised trial about this. And I said to this historian, why was there no Nuremberg? And he said, nobody wanted another Nuremberg. And I thought, well, that's just wrong. So the research is 40 years. Anything that I could read, anything that I could get, there's wonderful nonfiction on it. Black Sabbath by Robert Katz, Susan Zuccotti's wonderful book, Under His Very Windows, Stan Pugliese, his book about the most ancient of minorities. Because what is so fascinating about this, and there's so many things that recommend it as a subject, is that the Jewish community in Rome is the oldest continuously existing Jewish community in Western civilization. Now, why has it not been the subject of heretofore? And so the more I learned, the more on fire I was. I also made plenty of trips back to Rome. And I'm lucky enough to be published in Italy. So I would go there on book tour. And I remember my Italian editor said, oh, let's go to the ghetto. We'll have the artichokes. And I thought, this is really hallowed ground. And 20 years ago, there was the museum that's there now didn't exist. And anyway, you get the idea. I just really felt what really was the motivation for me ultimately was that I went back for the 75th anniversary of what happened in October 1943. I don't like to call it the roundup. I want to call it what it is, which is a mass arrest and murder. And I went back to a memorial service. Now, it was open to the public, but clearly they all knew each other and they all spoke Italian. And I'm just like this short little lady from Philly with a legal pad taking notes, honestly, and trying to understand and be a part of it. And people said, what are you doing here? And I started to talk to them because I understand Italian better than I speak it. And I said, well, actually, I'm an author and I'm going to write. And I was like, I want to write about this. And how do you feel about that? And they said, we would love it. We can't believe that, it's been so disregarded. And so for me, that was a really personal, because I saw family who had lost people. And I met them and their descendants, and I was a part of it. And they were so welcome to me, as the Jewish community has been, as JBC has been. And that's an honor. And so I said, I have to do this justice. I really have to make this, and this is the lawyer part, as a federal law clerk too, I mean, I just have a real respect for a historical record and a definitive one. For example, a quick example. In the book, we can talk about what the course of when the Nazis come in and occupy Rome, one of the things they do is they sack the library in the ghetto, which was housed in the synagogue. And this was a library of all the patrimony of Jewish civilization and also of Christian. It was priceless artifacts. And it is a matter of fact that what they did was take it and also throw some out the window, just
right,
to be brutal. And when I wrote that scene, when I turned this book in, it was 1,000 pages. Wow. And I have one, I know, and I have but I had this, I'm a geeky urge to not take anything out. You can't tell this story without saying, what did the fascists do? Tell us about these anti-Semitic laws that they enacted, because they can't get off the hook, because basically they set up the Nazis to come in and liquidate the ghetto. My editor, and I love him, but he did say, gee, do we really need that scene in the library? And I said, yes, yep, we do. We need that scene in the library. We need to show the cruelty, the disregard, this really heinous behavior at personal level. So I guess what I'm trying to say is all of the research mattered. I feel like it's real. All of my novels have a lot of research. And I do feel that my name's on these books. This has always been my name. I'm married and divorced twice. And my name's on pleadings too. Everything that I write, I have to, think of it like there has to be a record citation at the end. It has to be absolutely right. And so I think this is absolutely right. And I thought I hope more people write about this, because they say Italy is the forgotten front, and that's true. And certainly what happened there in the ghetto, so-called ghetto, needs more examination.
You mentioned that Italy has the longest continuous Jewish population in Western civilization. I had always thought that it began when the temple was destroyed and the Jews were marched off to Italy as slaves, but it goes back to the time of the Maccabees, when Judah Maccabees sent scouts to Italy, and I visited synagogues in the Lower Boot in Bari, etc., that are, I mean, centuries and centuries old.
Right. So I just got back from Sicily, and you can see in Syracuse, like it is. And you know what? I really envisioned Massimo's family in the book. I love that character. And he believes in law, and he believes in justice, and he believes that law leads to justice. And his family goes back that far. But it isn't that remarkable. Isn't that remarkable, Karen, that history is so, the breadth of it, it's amazing.
I have a personal feeling that there's an affinity between Italians and Jews, because the Jews have been in Italy so long, and with intermarriage, I think all Italians might be a little bit Jewish.
I tell you, I feel it, or I'm a wannabe. You're probably going to end up with me whether you want me or not.
Well, for me, I loved ancient history. Modern history, I wasn't so. What happened to me in high school and in college was, we studied, and then it got toward the end of the year, and we hadn't really covered World War II. And I'm like, okay, when I was in high school, I thought, well, I'll get it in college. Same thing happened in college. And so I said, okay, I'll save the books. And so for me, historical novels that I'm learning much about history through historical novels that, like you, expertly blend fact with fiction. And for instance, you have real characters in your book, like Tullio Levi-Civita.
Right.
So will you tell us a little bit about him? And also, then I was wondering if you modeled Aldo's character, the cyclist, after Bartoli, who was reputed to have ferried communications between the partisans hidden in the handles of his bicycle. He was a prize-winning cyclist.
Right. Well, first, just to speak to, I started to answer the question, I think, a little bit, why did Italians follow fascism when I started to read the speeches of Mussolini? Because, the myth is that, Mussolini made the trains run on time, and that's what we all accept. My reading is that's not what happened, because Italians don't care if things run on time. They still don't. Nothing runs on time in Italy. But I really thought that when I read Mussolini's speeches, I saw that he was appealing to this ultra nationalism. This idea that you're very special. They were the civilization, as you say, right? They conquered the world. So you can convince a Roman that they're very, very special, given their history and their dominance at one point. And that's kind of what Marco falls for. He goes into that. And that was really important to Mussolini. When Marco goes into that excavation site, that was actually happening in Rome. That site that he's in was actually being excavated. And people can go on my website and see pictures of this, because I kind of had an interactive map and stuff. And that Mussolini did that because he wanted Romans to be walking and driving all the time past things like the Colosseum. If you've been to Rome, I remember the first time I was in Rome, I couldn't believe that the Colosseum is like, here's the Colosseum and here's the sidewalk. And then there's the traffic. And I was like, there are airports that have bigger buffers. But that was by design. So I thought that was so fascinating. And now I kind of forget what you were the first
well, talking about Tullio Levi-Civita,
oh, right.
and Aldo the cyclist.
When I learned about Tullio Levi-Civita, it broke my heart, because when you read what he said, and there's something about his cuteness. He was small. My mother's 4'11". Maybe I just like little, but he was so brilliant. He was called the Einstein of Italy. And I have it in the novel, but if you haven't read it, let me just say briefly, because I feel like he never got his moment in the sun. But he came to prominence because he basically read something Einstein published, his Entwerf paper, and found an error. And he wrote to Einstein, and Einstein's like, no, it's perfectly correct. Like, I'm kind of Einstein. But then they have this conversation, and Levi-Civita turns out to be absolutely right. The men become fast friends. He comes back and forth to Princeton all the time to visit him. And it also is a way of showing, fascism is interesting. And I kind of wanted to show also that this terrible discrimination, this barrage of anti-Semitic laws, which I'm not sure people know that the fascists did, the Italians did, stripping you of property, of profession, of taking you out of school, throwing the teachers out of school, ultimately stripping you of party membership, as you see, it devastates Massimo, and of citizenship at all. It's so fascinating because you really see the effect on the psyche, and it really becomes about identity. And you see the loss. How can we calculate the loss to world mathematics and physics when we lose someone like Levi-Civita, who was thrown out of his teaching profession? And I named the actual professors. It was a huge brain drain in Rome and throughout Italy, because these brilliant, brilliant teachers who happened to be Jewish were not permitted to teach anymore. How do you calculate that loss? And so I really wanted to explore that a little bit through Sandro. And also with respect to Marco, I did love the story of Gino Bartali, who did, there's a question about whether he did ferry messages back and forth, but there's some, part of it is I wanted the elements that are distinctly Italian, cycling, and also to feed into character. They're wonderful books in nonfiction. These are all the books I used. But my job is to fictionalize it so that people feel it, like really feel it, are in these families. Elisabetta, she can't decide between these two guys. These guys, the novel is about love, not only romantic love, but the love between Jew and Gentile, the love of God, that even though they worship differently, they still worship. Love of country. Fascists think they love the country. Anti-fascists think they love the country. And these questions are obviously still relevant today. So I really wanted to plumb that. And also you mentioned food, just as a quick aside. It's a good illustration because Italians and Jews love food. It's just all there is to it. So I have so much of it in the beginning, because partly what I learned through my research is that the Allied plan, our plan was, when we entered the war, was to bomb places in Italy where grain was grown. By the way, my father obviously was in the Army Air Force. He bombed Italy. So our plan was to do that, as I think I suggested in the book briefly, because we thought that that would weaken Italy, because they were kind of sold a bill of goods that it's going to be a short war and they're going to win and it's going to be great. And when they start to go hungry and they start to not have bread and they start to not have pasta, they start to see their cities decimated and lives lost, they are out. But then when the Nazis come in, it was so horrifying, because everything I read showed me that the Nazis weaponized food against the Jews of Rome, that they actually tried to starve them into submission. Right. So that you sort of see Sandro's family, they love food and they have great food, and that my grandmother's recipes in there. But then when the Nazis come in, and they were also trying to encourage tuberculosis, typhus, malnutrition. It was just horrible. You see Sandro's family sitting around this table with almost no portions, and the gravy's watered down. And so my job is to make you understand that feeling and experience it, but ultimately love, so that, when Marco stands and he loved Sandro, Sandro gave his life for him, and he would have given his life for his best friend. And when he stands at that window, and I sort of love that what Rome does for you, it's the eternal city. I thought, I wonder why that is. I think I made up a reason. Because for me, when I'm in Rome, I feel space and time conflated. I stand next to the ruins and I stand next to something in 1960 and I go, what's the matter? What's the difference? It's all existing at this point in time, like a family is layers of time, sort of coexisting. I'm so much my mother, and even though she's passed so long ago, she's always with me. And I'm so much my daughter. And I wanted all of those feelings in the book, so that when Marco looks at that window and he can see Sandro in his mind's eye come to that window the way he always did. And he makes that vow to him. And then Maria at the end, I think, sort of speaking to the survival of the spirit, that she's the only one left. And she feels the loss of all of these people all the time, Jew and Gentile alike. And she says every day she feels like scraps. She's every woman in front of a refrigerator saying, what can I make with what I have? And I kind of love that spirit of her.
Well, just in you retelling this, I'm remembering the scene, and I'm misting up here. We have a couple of questions in the chat, so I'd like to toss those at you.
Sure, go ahead.
Naomi Levine is asking, how do you find the relationship between the Italians and the Jews today?
Huh. You mean in Italy?
I'm assuming yes.
I'm assuming yes. I think I have been, I can't really speak to it over much, but I will say, I think, though, to a certain extent, it's normalized, but I have been concerned of late. I would think in the past 5 years, there has been outbreaks of anti-Semitism, particularly, for example, at soccer matches. There has been a new rise of fascism. It's global. It's here, and it's in Italy, and it's in Germany. And I remain very concerned. If you read, really brilliant historians like Ruth Ben-Ghiat, Felix Finkelstein, I think that's his first name, Timothy Snyder, Masha Gessen, you see similarities with the rise of autocracy. And so Nazism, we know, is very, very, right? People have a reaction that's visceral. Fascism is a little, I think of it as sneakier. It can parade as ultranationalism, as it did in Italy. And then that's the carrot. The stick is force. The stick is violence unless you join. In Eternal, when you open the book, they're all fascists, every single one of it, because they had to be. People like Beppe are proud of it. So is Massimo. But then it turns. So I am concerned. I am concerned about the rise of fascism and anti-Semitism. And I feel like they are in lockstep.
And I think that this book is important for this time to remind people through your work about that very fact.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I hope that's true. I think people, I just wrote about the time period, and I leave people to draw their own conclusions about it.
We have another question. Was there any attempt to save the Jews of Italy the way Valerian Fry saved the Jews of France?
The Vatican didn't do anything. Now, when I did research, I learned about someone like these anecdotal things, like Monsignor O'Flaherty, who really was a real person. And there is ample evidence that he saved Jewish families, hid them in the Vatican, and also throughout apartments in Rome with the knowing eye of the Vatican. So sort of a back channel. And also there was a wonderful story of that hospital, which I went to visit in Rome. And it was, at the time, it's larger now, but it's a small Catholic hospital on Tiber Island. And it's attached to a church. And when they found that the Nazis were coming in, they instantly, and this for people who haven't read it yet, but I don't mind spoiling it, the administrator, Dr. Borromeo, came up with this idea that basically they would put all the Jewish patients in one ward, tell the Nazis that they had some terrifying airborne virus that killed, and it was called Syndrome K, which I kind of love as a detail because it shows a little, it's so Italian that Syndrome K was a kind of a little bit of a play on words for Field Marshal Kesselring, who was the commander of the Nazis in southern Italy. And so they were a little bit tweaking him, but they saved those lives. So there were certainly anecdotal things, but there was no, horribly, there was no official widespread attempt to save the Jews. The Jews of Rome, and the ghetto was taken. Any other Jews that the Nazis could get were taken. And they went exactly on the path that I researched and videoed and put in the novel. It was actually the path Primo Levi went on. They were taken to the Collegium Militare, which is right outside, which is 5 minutes from the Vatican. And they were sent from there to Fossili, which I went to, and I thought, oh, this is so interesting. By the way, very vis-a-vis the whitewashing of it, there's one day this camp is open for people to go educate themselves. It's on Sunday. There was nobody there. It's not like an official education center like other camps are. I haven't been, but I've certainly seen documentaries. And I think what I did was plausibly construct a way you could have escaped from that camp, but they were sent on to Auschwitz, and they were not saved. And that's why when I went to that memorial, the names of those people who were murdered is known. Robert Katz has it in the back of his book. And so I actually used some of those names because that's who was taken. That's who was murdered. And I didn't want them to be forgotten. I wanted to honor them. And I hope I have.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I know in other areas of Italy, Jews were saved by individuals. There were individual peoples, or there were also concentration camps in the South that were not labor camps. People were given a place to stay and a little bit of food, and they had to report in twice a day in the morning, and at night they had to report to the police station, yeah, we're still here.
Right.
So it was more that Italians themselves helped keep the Jews alive or hide them.
Right. And in convents, there was some activity there, but it was individual. It was not an organized effort.
Right, right. When you talk about writing about love, the love between Elisabetta and her parents, and the love between Marco and Massimo, and those, I mean, talk about inner conflicts and outer conflicts. You've got so many family conflicts going on in this broader historical time period.
Right. Well, I love families and the drama that is in families, and also vis-a-vis answering my own question about why Italians did this. I sort of had to show that arc because they all fell under fascism's sway to a certain extent, except for someone like Aldo. And so you see them be seduced. You see Marco and Sandro part ways, but Marco's always torn up inside about it. And you see them come out the other side going, we made a terrible mistake. This was terrible. And try to come to terms with it. I wish there had been more of a reckoning that was more official, but I really wanted to do it at sort of the personal level. And honestly, the novel is a lot about identity. You know, they say there's two plots in the world. One is a man goes on a quest.
Right.
Eternal bit of a man goes on a quest. Coming of age will always be a man goes on a quest. And a stranger comes to town. It's sort of an interesting thing. All right. And I do notice it. But the thing about a man goes on a quest or coming of age is that it's fundamentally going to be about identity, because it's like, how does this world event change you? Like, look at Marco. He's so cocky in the beginning, even though he has a secret that he's ashamed of, you know, and at the end, he's humbler. He says, Elisabetta, I lost my best friend. I lost everything. I lost my father. I lost a war. And you want to look at, here's Massimo, who is so, and it's very, for me, it's sort of relevant because, you know, we have to look at our signifiers. What is it? What are the sources of our identity? I'm an Eagles fan. This season isn't so great, but I'm an Eagles fan, right? I have some green stuff. And I heard people say, you've heard this expression, I bleed green. And when I heard that, I said, this is so interesting, because people will internalize a sports team. That's who I am. I went to Penn, whatever you are, right? So Massimo, and you see that with Massimo, he identifies very much with being a fascist. He identifies very much with being Jewish. He wants his daughter to marry a Jewish guy, an Italian. He wants his son to marry a Jewish girl. At the end, he has to think about what is it that makes him him. So does Beppe. Beppe identifies so much with being a fascist of the first hour and a warrior. And he has to really think about, is that good for him? What are its limits? How does it exclude others? And I'll just throw this at you because it was a wonderful, amazingly profound quote by Primo Levi himself. And I saw a video that he said it. He said, as long as you think of somebody, another human being, as different from you, you will think of them as other than you. And when you think of them as other than you, you will think of them as less than you. And in the end, there is a camp. And I thought, well, that's exactly right. Like, he knows, and that's exactly right. It's that slide. And the answer to that is love. I mean, that's why I put the quote at the beginning. You know, I couldn't decide what quote. I had all these quotes. I mean, 40 years of quotes that seemed relevant. I sprinkled them throughout the book, you know, fancier ones. But the one I kept coming back to was love conquers all things. I just thought that really is the answer. The love between these families, between these people, that is what bridges the divide, I think.
Well, I have a friend who is a big fangirl who grew up in Philly and went to Maria Goretti High. And she was hoping, Caroline Kaviclis, she was hoping that the Vatican maybe had done more. But in your research, that was all you had found, right?
No, the only thing I will say is that what I did find in my research was that what they say is that they felt that if they had done more, there would have been a backlash. And so their position is we did things through back channels. I leave that to you to decide. I wish they had done more too. I wish everybody had done more. That's why I'm telling this story.
Well, one of the things that I noted that struck me when I read it was something that Massimo said to Marco was a very, very Jewish thing. Whether you realize this or not, or maybe it comes from the influence of Primo Levi, but he said, you must do good, but you must not talk about it. And in Jewish thinking, you give charity, you give tzedakah, but the highest form of charity is the anonymous one. And so whether you know it or not, that was a very Jewish thing that you had a non-Jewish father tell his son.
Well, that's very kind of you. I think I did know that, but I kind of love it because, and also I just also love the Jewish tradition of justice and what it means. And this notion that your duty is to just at the world and another person, and it's always with you. And I wanted to show this in both of these characters. You know, Beppe doesn't really have much of a religious compass. His wife does. But I wanted to explore, where does he get his sense of morality? He has it. And so it's almost self-actualized. but I do think there's the echo of that. You know, he and Massimo are very dear friends. And I love that Massimo has such a strong urge for justice, have such a belief, you know, that in accountability and justice and doing the right thing. That's why I thought it was really important because, you know, the Jews of Italy, as we've said, were so well assimilated and protected. Jews came from all over Europe to Italy thinking it would be safe harbor, partly because the Vatican was there and they thought the Allies will never bomb the Vatican. Of course, it ended up that the Allies bombed Rome and the Nazis bombed Rome, which is horrific. But I forgot my point. Rats. I just thought it was really kind of interesting to think about how, I can't remember. Oh, I know what it was. That Massimo's idea that law will lead to justice gets corrupted first by the fascists and then by the Nazis. And so, but he never stops believing in it. And he loves justice. He's on the train thinking, I will make myself useful. And I thought that's who he is. He makes himself useful. And so when things get very dark, he doesn't leave the community. At the end, I sort of wanted to make very clear, both he and his wife decide to stay because they make themselves useful, because of their notion of justice and service. And I just admire him so much.
He's applying for all of these exceptions to allow people to remain and the whole episode where what struck me, and then my husband said to me, I can't believe you didn't realize that, was that the oppression, the racial laws were first one and then the next, and then they just kept piling down. You thought today was bad. Well, tomorrow is going to be a billion times worse.
Right. I really wanted to make that point. That's another example of how I couldn't shortcut it. You could have just said this one law, but I was like, no, what happened is it's death by 1,000 cuts, which really, to the Jewish community, which really goes to Primo Levi's point. It starts benign, and then it starts to turn. And then you think, well, I can live with that. And then, you know, I just thought that was really, really important. I also think vis-a-vis, when you look at the Nazis' course of conduct, very briefly, here's the Nazis. They come in, they arrest the Carabinieri, so they leave Rome defenseless. They go to the synagogue, they vandalize it and steal. They're thieves. Then they sack the library. Then they play this horrible, heinous cat and mouse game of the gold of Rome. And then they arrest and the entire ghetto and send them to murder. Now, when I saw that, I said, you know, this is a very interesting chronology because there's another way to have done this. They could have just arrested the Carabinieri. That would have left the community defenseless. Then right then, go arrest the Jews. Because that's the path of least resistance, isn't it? You really want people around why do you want people around while you sack the synagogue? Why do you want people around while you sack the library? And I said, well, that was kind of like, is this just cruel? Because it's not really efficient. And I asked a historian and he said, yeah, the cruelty really was the point. The dominance was the point. We can do this to you. And so we will, and you will watch.
And we can get away with it.
And we can get away with it. We can get away with it. And that's, in the end, there is a camp. That's the horror of it. And I really wanted to tell it as completely and as definitively as possible.
Well, with 30 million books in print, ladies and gentlemen, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you write, when you write, where you write. Do you have a set schedule, a set place? How are you so prolific?
Oh, you're so kind. And I would love to hear what you do too as a fellow author. I am so prolific because I live alone with a bunch of dogs and a cat. I don't really have much of a personal life. And honestly, I feel very lucky. I mean, my religion is something like gratitude. I'm in my dining room now. I have a life in books. I wake up every day. I wanted this job so badly, partly because I was a single mom for so long, raising my daughter. And I thought, gee, how can I And how can I get these stories into the world? And how can I also raise a kid as a single mother? And it took a really long time and a lot of rejection. My favorite rejection letter was from a New York agent who said, "We don't have time to take anybody and we wouldn't take you." I know, it's so mean. And I saw him once. I was at Book Expo, which is our big trade show, and I was the keynote. I have to brag. I give my big speech. It's all entertaining and everything. He comes up to me later, Lisa. I'm like, dude, I remember you, pal. And I don't have time to talk to anybody, but if I did, I wouldn't talk to you. That's how petty I am. Like vendetta is an Italian word for a reason.
Yes. We remember.
Right. But I live in this house and I kind of work all around it. I have an office upstairs, which is a lot like your office. I love your office. It has a pink walls and,
Thank you.
Beautiful art. And I do 2,000 words a day. And I end up, as Hemingway says, well, I shouldn't quote it, but it's write drunk, edit sober. So I don't really know. I don't have an outline, which for Eternal almost killed me. I mean, it took a year to write, which is longer than most of my novels. And I just was like, wow, this is a really big canvas. But you're always trying to figure out what happens next. That's what I find. So that the book ends up being character driven and the characters give you the plot. And then certainly when I got to the history and the Gold of Rome episode, I was like, oh, this is going to work. This will work.
Oh, that's so
like your method?
No, that's so interesting because I have always used a roadmap. Sometimes it takes me on scenic route adventures, and I find things that I didn't know were coming, but I pretty much, have things. The one that I'm working on now has driven me crazy. I finally resorted to 3x5 cards with all the different scenes I needed and on the dining room table. Actually, one day I was at the synagogue and I went into one of the classrooms and I just said, this is it. God help me. And I laid them all out on the table and kind of figured out how everything was going to was going to fall. I used to do about 6 pages a day. That was my goal. Lately, it's been a little bit less than that. And I've been overthinking things.
Right. Overthinking is
that's
that too.
Yeah, it's a big problem.
Well, I think the problem with writing, and I really encourage people to, because honestly, you don't have to have any special education or anything like that. And people who read a lot I think write wonderfully, because I think reading builds empathy. It's not just a story. You are in someone's head and feeling their feelings if the book is written well. I always think of that great quote by Atticus Finch. He says to Scout, you walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Readers do that every time they open a novel. So read a lot if you want to write, but I really encourage people to give it a chance. And you can do it with the roadmap or without one. Don't you think? It's whatever works for you.
Right. There are people who say, I absolutely cannot write from an outline. I think Hank Philippi Ryan just said that the last book she tried to use an outline and it wasn't working. Finally, she said, forget the outline. And she writes the way you do. She just sits down with the germ and of the idea and lets it take over.
Yeah. And the hard thing is you have to figure out what happens next. But I think I'm sort of a spontaneous person. And a little bit, I think if I had an outline, it would feel like Mad Libs, like fill in the blank time. And a little bit, I want there to be, this is a dramatic book. All my novels have drama. And I secretly think that I'm so nervous when I'm writing it because I don't really, like people say, do you know how it ends? I don't know how it ends. I don't even know how it middles. I don't know anything. And I do think that my anxiety about what they're going to do is somehow through osmosis gets onto the page, but not everybody does it. But the great thing is, and then I just kind of like write it out. I don't permit myself to edit because then it will have a very polished first chapter. I make myself go to the end. I say to myself, and I say all these things, get it down, then get it good. And overthinking is I think the reason it's hard to write, I will tell you, because I say this to my daughter and we talk about it all the time, now that she's a novelist in her own right, is that you're working through all your emotional issues too. We're insecure. Why else would it take me? Well, I don't want to say you are, but I know I am.
I am. Oh, I am.
Okay. I think nice people are insecure actually. So, but it takes 40 years. If it took me 40 years to get up the courage to write this, I mean, something's really in the way. But at some point you go, well, just try. It's fear. And the opposite of fear is try. And so you just try. And as the wonderful Anne Lamott says in Bird by Bird, you don't have to show anybody your first draft. And you can't edit a blank page. I think particularly for women, I'm not sure that we're socialized to take risk. And to a certain extent, risk is writing. For me, I have a career as doing all these different things, writing different things. And I say to my publisher, I'm going to change everything. Oh. But I was like, well, you got to try it. You're qualified. Go and do it.
Yeah,
Try.
first drafts are not carved in stone like the 10 Commandments coming down with Moses.
Exactly.
So, and
exactly.
what I say to people is write a page a day, double spaced, and in a year you'll have a book.
That's really true.
Yeah, it is.
That's wonderful advice because it just has to be behavioral. And it's just like they say it about everything. Your closet's a mess. Okay, well, do one drawer at a time, right? Break it down into a task. E.L. Doctorow has a wonderful quote, which I'm going to butcher right now, but he says something like, you can drive across the country in the light from your headlights. It's something like that. And that's really true.
Right.
You only need to see a little bit.
Right.
You don't need to see the whole thing. And if you think that, you're going to freeze. You're going to freeze.
I'm going into my next chapter with that attitude.
Just get it down.
You can do
it, Karen. Jeez, of course you can do it.
We have a couple of more questions, Lisa.
Sure.
Liara Edut wants to know, whom would you mainly put on trial at a Nuremberg type trial for what happened to the Jews in Italy? And what do you think would have been a just conclusion or punishment?
That's a great question. Well, the true answer that's sad is that now it's too late. The Nazis and the fascists, right? The people who did this are gone. Kepler, who was mentioned in the book, was tried in some Italian tribunal and actually went to prison and ultimately weirdly escaped with the help of his wife at a hospital. So I that was my frustration, because as a person, as a lawyer, I have that, we have that great, everybody has a feeling about justice and right and wrong. You don't need a law degree for it. But I was like, it's too late. It's too late. I think all of the players and all of the Nazis and all the fascists should have been on trial. But that did not happen, and it can't happen now. But that's what I said to myself. And what was my insight from the Memorial Service? I said, well, you're a lawyer, but you have no one to sue. The victims are gone and the perpetrators are gone. What can you do? You can tell the story. And people can read the story. And now they know the story. And so when you start to hear some would-be autocrats saying things like, the kinds of things autocrats say, you have to go, this will not end. This will end in a camp. And remember, who told you? Primo Levi, not me.
Right. Question from Jamie Loeb is, do you go into writing a novel with a point to make or a message?
Well, thanks, Jamie, for having me, by the way. No, I don't make a point, because I really have to tell a story that moves people. So there has to be emotional truth to it. Perfect case in point is Elisabetta. When I started this, I said to myself, first, don't be afraid, because it's historical fiction, because you've always written stories about families and justice. This is just that. And also, interestingly, and you can check me on this, when people are entering an historical period, they don't know it. We are living through a historical period now. We didn't know it in March. We're living through a global pandemic, right? In March, I remember watching these videos from China and going, oh, these poor people, this flu is so terrible. What if it came here? And then the next thing I know, 1 month later, my daughter lives in New York. I'm like, please come home. I want you home. This looks like it might last like a month.
A month.
So, right? You don't really know what you are entering until you're in it. And what I think is so amazing and wonderful about this time, I'm the only person that doesn't have Zoom fatigue, because I think we are processing this together in real time. And so when I had that sort of insight, I said to myself, well, that's Elisabetta. That's all of these people who went through fascism. That's all of the Jews in the ghetto who are trying to process this dreadful situation, hope it doesn't last. So I say to myself, make her real. Well, I gave her what happened to me in 6th grade, because if it's a coming of age novel, we're going to talk about the coming of your gender identity. And she gets her first bra. I wanted it to be a really personal, mundane, if you will, example. This is a book that's eternal, and it's going to deal with justice and love and a real important period in Jewish history. But by the way, a young girl who's born during this period, girls will come up to her and go, "You need a bra." And that happened every day. And that actually happened to me in 6th grade. And I was like, oh, I remember what this is like. And I said to my mom, they made fun of me at school. And she's like, we're going to get you a bra. Because I had a great mom who's a little bit like Nona. And that night we got a bra and we went to Horn and Hardhearts for apple pie. Please tell me, somebody out there, did you have Horn and Hardhearts? Probably not. But in any event,
no, the characters are so well drawn, and so identifiable.
Thank you for that. Are you really? So you can't really have a message. You just really have to tell their story and try to imagine what it was like to be them.
Well, love, justice, and family has been your theme. So that kind of, I think, is your message. And then in some books, there's humor. In your right. Newspaper column, there's humor. I know you just came back from a trip to Sicily as research for the next book. Can you give us a little hint as to what you're working on?
Right, I'm happy to. Well, first, I do have a book coming out in March that is a domestic thriller about a family seeking justice at a time when the rule of law is in question. Book yet, but I just got back from Sicily researching a novel that I want to write set in the 1800s in Sicily, because I started to learn about, as you may know, the Inquisition and how the Inquisition in 1493 expelled Jews from Sicily. And yet there were some that remained and practiced their religion such as they could in secret. And I thought that is very interesting. And so that book will be entitled Sacred, and it will be out after What Happened to the Bennett. So I feel very lucky, because thank God for you and this program and my readers who have been really open-hearted about reading both things. In fact, look, I'm just geeky enough to tell you that I read my Goodreads review every day. Like, I see what people are saying. I care. And reviews in this are wonderful. But a lot of people say, oh, I'm not a historical fiction fan, but I like her, so I gave this a try. That makes me so happy. Because I want to try to do both from now on. I really love, and I think they dovetail, and I think they feed each other. The next domestic thriller is better written. It has a little bit of history in it because I got interested in history and where families come from and family history. As I know you, it's something that interests you, Karen. So that's sort of what's down the pipe.
Oh, I'm excited. I'm excited for both of those.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you want to share with us?
No, I honestly just want to say my deepest thanks. I just have been so touched and so grateful for the generosity of the Jewish community, for JBC, for having me at these Jewish book fairs. Detroit, thank you so much. I've come out bunches of times for the library in Grosse Pointe and Flint and the Great Lakes Book Festival, and I miss coming out there because you're great readers out there, and the library system is wonderful. But this is really a special book, and I just am super, super grateful that you let me tell this story and took it to your heart. And I hope that I have done justice to the victims. That was really my greatest hope.
Well, I just got chills at the back of my head. So remind everybody again, if you can see this well on my screen, Eternal by Lisa Scottoline. If you're going to buy it, and you better, please buy it from the Jewish Book Fair in Detroit. And we are the oldest Jewish book fair in the country, and celebrating our 70th year. Yeah, we started it right here.
That is so cool. Well, thank you so much for having me. And Karen,
thank you, Lisa.
Stay in touch with me, girl, okay?
Love being with you.
Thank you, Lisa and Karen, for being with us and for such a wonderful discussion. And thank you to all of you at home for joining us. Our next event is Jewish Pride by Ben Freeman tonight, Wednesday, November 10th at 7 p.m. Remember to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and visit our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/book fair for our full schedule and ways to get involved. See you tonight.